All right, good afternoon. We'll go ahead and call to order the regular meeting of the City of Murfreesboro Board of Zoning Appeals for November 20th, 2014. First item on the agenda is the consideration of minutes from our meeting back on October 22nd. Those minutes are included with our agenda materials. Any changes to those minutes? If not, they'll stand approved as presented. And we'll next consider new business. First, begin with some variance requests. The first one is application Z 14063 by Mr. Thomas Steffen for D.R. Horton. He's making the following request for property located in a residential single-family RS-15 zone at 5122 General Eisenhower Drive, which is in the Liberty Valley subdivision. First of all, 10-foot variance from the minimum required 40-foot front building setback, and then a 17-foot variance from the minimum required 30-foot rear building setback for principal structures. All right, Mr. Blomley, if you'd review that for us, please.
Yes, sir. Thank you, Chairman Rogers, and good afternoon, Chairman Rogers and members of the board. Our first variance request today, as you mentioned, is for Lot 206 of the Liberty Valley subdivision, which is located right at the intersection of General Eisenhower Drive and Bastogne Way. The applicant is Thomas Steffen with D.R. Horton. D.R. Horton is one of the home builders in the Liberty Valley subdivision, actively building on the vacant lots in Liberty Valley. Mr. Steffen came to me about a month ago in trying to determine the setbacks for this particular lot. It is a little bit of an unusually shaped lot, and so after I looked at that with him, and he tried to fit a house on this lot, and it was very difficult. And the lot, as it's designed with the setbacks of the RS-15 zone, left only about a 30-foot deep building envelope. The property is zoned RS-15, which is different when you look at it compared to the lots to the south. The lots to the south are zoned RS-10, which actually has reduced setbacks as compared to the RS-15 zone, and the lots to the south are much deeper. If you look at the aerial photo on the screen in front of us, this lot is right at the elbow of that intersection of General Eisenhower and Bastogne. So with that elbow, which is generally put in by developers not only to yield more lots, but also as for proper traffic design of the roads, with that elbow constructed there, it reduces the depth of that lot by about 20 feet. And when you look at this lot compared to the other lots to the south, which have lesser setbacks, it makes this lot very, very difficult to build on. I told Mr. Steffen that I thought it was a good candidate for a variance because of the such limited building envelope at only 30 feet deep. There aren't a whole lot of house plans that can fit in a building envelope that deep. And this lot was properly approved back about 8 or 9 years ago through the process, vetted by the planning staff and then the planning commission. But sometimes it's difficult to pick up on all the lots that might be difficult to build on. And this is one that when we reviewed it, we did not pick up on the fact that it was going to be a very difficult lot to build on, and that the building envelope, especially when taking into account the elbow of the intersection of those two streets, the effect that it had on the lot itself. As I mentioned, the applicant has tried to come up with a design that will work for this particular lot. And in discussing this with him, rather than pushing the house way far up to the front or way far back to the back, I recommended to him that he look at the possibility of applying for both a front setback variance and a rear setback variance. And so he's requested a 10-foot front setback variance. And what that does is it helps push the lot, or push the house forward to be more in line. Obviously, it won't be quite as in line with the houses to the south because those lots are so much deeper. But by pushing it further to to the front lot line, it will make it seem not quite so far back as it would be if it met the 40-foot front setback. If you look at the aerial photo, the house to the south, being zoned RS10, has to meet a 35-foot front setback. And this particular lot, the subject lot, has about 20 feet less of buildable lot depth, but actually greater front and rear setback requirements. So the applicant has requested the 10-foot front setback variance, and even by doing that, the house plan that's shown on the plot plan that he's submitted still encroaches into the rear setback. And he said that he's indicated to me that this house plan, it's kind of a generic house plan that he's using, one of their sample house plans. Right now, they don't have a customer for this lot. So they're trying to establish some setback parameters so that they can determine what houses of their house plans they can fit on this lot if they're granted setback variances. And so what he intends to do when he constructs the house is to angle the house so that not the entire house is, the entire back of the house is within the rear setback. You can see on the plot plan, and if we could put that up on the screen in front of us, you'll see how the rear of the house, one corner, juts farther back into that rear setback as it's angled to kind of be parallel to that front lot line, which is also curved because of the elbow in the road. So he's requesting a 17-foot rear setback variance, and that wouldn't be for the entire back of the house. It would only be for that one corner. But this would allow him to establish some parameters to know what he has to work with going forward. With that being said, I'll be happy to answer any questions. If the board approves the front setback variance request, staff recommends the following condition. A front entry garage will not be allowed for the proposed house. And this is something that we've done with applications in the past where we're looking at the possibility of a reduced front setback. Having a side or a rear entry garage, in this case more likely a side entry garage, allows there to be a driveway of adequate depth in order for there to be adequate room on the lot for on-site parking. Mr. Steffen is in attendance if you have any questions for him. And as I mentioned, I'll be happy to answer any questions before or after the public hearing.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Blomley. Any questions for Mr. Blomley? Mr. Steffen, anything you'd like to add to the application?
Yes.
Okay.
Oh, Chairman Rogers, I do have some photographs that I neglected to show.
Okay. Go ahead.
This is the lot. The house in the background is the house behind the subject lot. This is the elbow. You can kind of see looking north at that elbow that juts into the property. And this is looking down, looking to the south at that elbow in the roadway. This is the adjacent property to the south. The adjacent property to the northwest, which is a vacant lot that Mr. Steffen's company also owns. And this is the adjacent house to the east. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Blomley. At this time, we'll conduct a public hearing. Anyone present wishing to speak for or against this application, if you would, please come forward. All right. And seeing none, we'll declare the public hearing closed and open the floor for further discussions or motion.
If no further discussions, I'll make a motion to approve the 10-foot variance with the remarks by the staff.
Second.
All right, we have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? I can't help but add my 2 cents here. This is an application that is almost identical to the first application that we had last month, where we had a builder coming to us wanting relief from setbacks that were a matter of public record when he bought the lot, and that the only difficulty was that the building envelope was small, like 30 feet, as it is in this case. I still puzzle over why developers continue to submit and the city continues to approve plans in subdivisions that include building envelopes of 30 feet or less, where you cannot get a house on the property without having a setback. So this was being just like the last one. Everybody knew when D.R. Horton purchased this property what the building setbacks were. They have to come forward to prove certain things in order to get the variance. One, that it's not self-created, and I mean everybody knew when they came in that this is what the building setbacks were. There's no practical difficulty here. I mean, we've got cul-de-sac lots or elbow lots all throughout the city. That doesn't in and of itself make it a practical difficulty. I think the remedy is for there to be a change on what's submitted and what's approved in the way of subdivision plans. So for that reason, I'm going to vote no again on this one. All right. Any further discussion? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? No. All right. That application, I believe, was approved by a vote of 3 to 1.
Julie didn't vote.
I'm having trouble. John's comments are speaking to me, and I feel similarly to him that this is an issue, and I think I also would like to vote no.
Okay. You want to do a roll call vote? Carolyn, you want to do that?
If I could just address one thing that you said, Chairman Rogers, the subdivision plats that come in and are reviewed by the planning staff, and speaking as someone who, a long time ago did the review of the plans that come in, there are lots that get through that. We do the best job that we can in reviewing those subdivision plats, but the volume of plans that come through and the number of lots that we look at, we do the best to make sure that we kind of edit out some of those lots that, will not be buildable as they're drawn. There are ones, and I think this is an example of one that went through the process, staff reviewed, it didn't pick up on the lack of depth for the lot, and as it is, it has been created, and with the 30-foot depth, and the lot that we looked at last month, I believe the building envelope was over 40 feet deep, and it was still and the builder was having a hard time with that depth, although he was able to build the house, but just not the covered patio, which is what he built without a permit. Mm-hmm. In this case, the building envelope is 10 feet less in depth, so it's a matter of the lot even being buildable without variances. And so just from a staff standpoint, I certainly understand what you're saying, but there are the occasional lots that do get through that we try to do the best job with quality control, but sometimes those lots do get through.
Yeah, and I don't question that at all, Matthew. I agree with you 100%. But maybe what we need to do is my Tilting at Windmills effort to let developers know that on the front end they need to tell their engineers that we're going to make sure every lot is buildable in this subdivision. I understand the motivation that they want to make is create as many lots as they possibly can. And so there's this tug and pull that's going on between that. But if we say on the front end, make it clear that buildable lots are the only thing they're going to get approved from a city standpoint, and if you need a variance, it's still got to be a buildable lot, then I think the risk of plats coming in with unbuildable lots will decrease. And so I mean, maybe this lot, I don't know, I don't know, but I know from last month too, that application, you mentioned that there are at least 4 other lots in that subdivision that are likely going to come to us for the exact same reason. And so it doesn't seem to be a terribly isolated occurrence. If it was, maybe, okay. But I'm seeing this more and more as developers try to pack more and more lots into platted subdivisions. It's just, it seems like it's gone too far.
Mr. Chairman, if I might add just a little bit, and I don't want to advocate either position here, but I know staff does the best they can with the time they have to review these, but it's ultimately the responsibility of the developer and the developer's design professionals to make the lot conform to our standards. We as city staff do the best job we can to police that, to monitor it, to review it, but ultimately city is not a guarantor that this is a buildable lot, even if the subdivision plan, the plats, everything are approved. It is the designers, the developer's responsibility to do that, to make it work. And obviously, I don't think D.R. Horton was the designer of this, but they did buy it. And on what terms and how many they bought and what the transaction was, I don't have any knowledge, and I'm not sure it makes any difference if they bought this one lot or if they bought 100 lots out here. I don't know that it makes any real difference. I think that technically it doesn't, it may, in some ways it meets our criteria. It is the nature of the lot. It's shallow. In other ways, though, it's not because of a topography feature, or it's simply the way it was designed. And while D.R. Horton didn't create it, they bought it, and they bought it from someone who created it. So I think it's a tough question. It's a tough decision. It's hard for it's a hardship for them if they have to try to put something on in 30 feet, I suppose. But again, whether or not that should be the mere financial hardship is not supposed to be in itself a criteria for the board granting a variance. It's a difficult decision, though. So.
Yeah, I agree with everything you said about the city, and it should be a developer and the engineer's responsibility to make sure these things are buildable lots. All right. Well,
I just needed to think a little bit longer. I'm sorry, you cut my thinking time off.
That's when I get up here and start rambling on while I can think for a while. All right, we'll vote again.
That's fine.
Okay.
But suggest a roll call vote.
Okay.
Julia King,
No.
Ken Halliburton,
Yes.
Francis Smalley,
Yes.
and John Rogers.
No. All right. So,
At 2-2, it does not pass.
okay. Application fails. All right. We'll next consider application Z14064.
Well, we still need this was the first request for the 10-foot
10-foot.
easement, so we need separate motions on the 2 easements.
Okay. All right, so that was as far as it pertains to the 10-foot variance. Then we'll consider the 17-foot variance request. Any discussion on that request?
The only comment that I would make, I agree with what you said. I do think that there are unusual characteristics and there are practical difficulties which would, under how we're supposed to judge these things, that would be the purpose that I would vote yes. However, I agree with Mr. Rogers that all these things were known prior to the purchase of the lot. So I get that, but I do think that there are difficulties here because of the shape of the lot and that sort of thing. So then you got to weigh, well, you knew it going in, why should we just grant it going in, grant it after the fact? So I can see both sides of this.
Sure.
Please come to the microphone.
So I'm Thomas Steffen, I'm with D.R. Horton. When we purchased the lot, I think, and when I first came to Matthew looking for a true rear yard, my interpretation was that rear yard was coming off George Washington Boulevard. And so when I pulled the setback off of that, we actually had a house that would fit. But because, I guess according to the ordinance, the rear yard is the most, I don't know the exact language, but parallel with the front lot line. Well, since that's on a cul-de-sac bulb or an elbow, I just didn't, I guess, understand that to be the case. So that's why we put this forward as an alternative. So we looked at it when we bought the lot and maybe made the wrong interpretation of what that rear line was. So that's how we got to this point.
Okay. Any questions for Mr. Steffen? All right, thank you, sir. All right, any further discussion on our 17-foot request?
The first listing on here is that there are practical difficulties, or any, including narrowness, shallowness, shape, topography, or any other condition that makes it not just difficult, but extraordinarily difficult to comply with the general applicable regulations. And I think that I can't help but agree with Chairman Rogers. Is particularly with that language that it doesn't seem to me. I'm not convinced that it's extraordinarily difficult to comply, given the knowledge. That lot line. There's two back lot lines on this lot. That should be clear when you buy a piece of property. So it's very difficult for me to make a decision like that. I understand the circumstances you're in now, but these do seem to come before us quite with some frequency, and I think the onus isn't on the city to deter this. It's on the developers have to have that knowledge that these are things that need to be taken into consideration.
All right, ready to vote? All right, I guess we'll do another roll call vote, Carolyn.
I don't know that we have a
And
motion.
make a motion.
Oh, I'm sorry. I guess we need a motion.
I'll make a motion that we approve the 17-foot variance.
Have a second. Going once, going twice. Okay, that motion will fail for lack of a second. Do we have another motion?
If the motion to approve is not acted upon or not granted, I think that it's automatically that you don't need to formally deny it if it's not approved. But wouldn't be inappropriate.
But I don't think we've taken any action yet. We haven't actually had any kind of motion yet to.
But there wasn't there a motion to approve this, and it was died for lack of a second, so
It's done.
I think that's it.
Okay. Okay. All right, so that application then fails in its entirety.
Yep.
Okay. All right. Now, we'll next consider application Z 14064 by Mr. Lanson Hudson. He is requesting a 6-foot variance from the minimum required 25-foot rear building setback for principal structures, and this is for property located in an RS-10 zone at 2630 Mission Ridge Drive. Mr. Blomley.
Thank you, Chairman Rogers. The subject property is located, as you mentioned, at 2630 Mission Ridge Drive. It's zoned RS-10. It's in the Huntington Place subdivision, just north of DeJarnett Lane. The applicant is requesting a 6-foot variance from the minimum required 25-foot rear building setback, and you have a survey that he has provided to us on your desks showing the existing house as well as the existing deck on the back of the house, which Mr. Hudson proposes to build a sunroom over the existing deck. The existing deck protrudes about 4.38 feet into the rear setback, and he's requested that 6-foot variance because he wants to cover the existing deck with that sunroom, and that additional 1.5 feet or so will allow him a little bit of extra flexibility in the construction of that sunroom. The property abuts single-family residential uses on all sides. You can see in the aerial photograph above us there are single-family homes on the north and south side as well as to the rear. As I mentioned, the applicant would like to build a sunroom, an enclosed sunroom over the existing deck. He states that one of the owners has health issues which are exacerbated by elevated body temperatures, and because of this, the times of day and year that he can enjoy the backyard are limited, and the sunroom will allow him to enjoy the backyard without having exposure to the higher temperatures and direct sunlight. As we look at the survey of the property, you'll notice that the house was built, and Mr. Hudson, the applicant, is not the original owner or builder. He is a recent purchaser of the property. You'll notice that the house, which has a front entry garage, was built 41.26 feet from the front property line, which is 6.26 feet over the front or behind the front setback line. Had the house actually been built right on the front setback line and the same footprint house used, the deck would not require a rear setback variance. It would not encroach into that rear setback. But as the house was built 6.26 feet behind the rear setback line, the existing deck encroaches into the setback, and therefore the sunroom must comply with the minimum setback requirements, and where he wants to put it will not comply with the rear setback requirements. Also, as I mentioned, as you can see on the survey, the house was built with the bulk of the house, the main plane of the home. If we can pull that survey back up, the main plane of the home is pushed back further on the lot with the protruding front entry garage. Where a different house plan chosen for this lot, a rear setback variance likely would not have been required. The applicant believes that the impact of the reduced rear setback will be mitigated by the privacy fence that he has around the lot, as well as the dense vegetation on the adjacent property owner's property to the rear. One thing that I did want to point out, you'll notice that there is a shed that is located just several feet from the property line. When Mr. Hudson submitted the survey, staff noticed that shed and that it was in violation of the minimum 5-foot rear setback requirement. Notified Mr. Hudson about that, and Mr. Hudson has already moved it to be in compliance with the 5-foot rear setback requirement. That was a shed that he had brought onto the property earlier this year. and he did not realize the rear setback requirement, but he has brought that into compliance. I've got some photographs to show you. Well, first of all, here are the plans for the sunroom, and this is a photograph. These are photographs from the brochure for the sunroom that Mr. Hudson has submitted that give a representative picture of what he is looking at building on the back of his house over the existing deck. He has also submitted letters from 3 neighboring property owners. I believe the property owners that are to the north, south, and rear in support of the application. This one is from Andrew and Anna Cushingham at 2626 Mission Ridge Drive. This one is at 2634 Mission Ridge Drive, and it's John and Crystal Rigdon. And this last one, and all of these are included in your agenda materials, are from James and Faye Martin at 2633 Dorset Street. Here are some photographs of the property. This is the front of the applicant's house. This is the protruding front entry garage that I mentioned earlier. This is the existing deck at the rear of the house. And another couple of views of the deck. This is looking south and looking north. There's the shed that has been brought into compliance. And this is looking east to the rear of the subject property. And you can see the privacy fence and the vegetation that is to the rear of the property on the neighbor's property. This is looking at the adjacent property to the south and the adjacent property to the north. With that being said, I'll be happy to answer any questions, and Mr. Hudson is here in the audience if you have any questions for him.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Baumley. Any questions for Mr. Baumley? All right, Mr. Hudson, anything you'd like to add to the application? All right. Then at this time, we'll conduct a public hearing. Anyone present wishing to speak for or against this application, if you would, please come forward. And seeing none, we'll declare the public hearing closed and open the floor for further discussions or motion.
So Matthew, this 35-foot in the front and 25-foot in the back, those are the setback lines for this?
That's correct.
And so this home could have been built closer to the front of the...
That's correct.
Thank you.
If there's no other discussion, I'll make a motion that we approve.
I'll second.
I have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? If not, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, Mr. Hudson, that application has been approved. All right, we'll next consider application Z14065 by Mr. Matt Taylor for SEC and Mr. Russ Hatke of New Ground for AEDC, which is Ascend Federal Credit Union. They are requesting a 27-foot variance from the minimum required 42-foot front building setback for principal structures. And this property is located in a commercial local zone along the south side of East Main Street, east of Dill Lane. More specifically, the subject property is located at 2302 and 2308 East Main Street, 103 and 111 Dill Lane, and 106 Nesbitt Drive. The variance pertains to the front building setback along East Main Street. All right, Mr. Baumley.
Thank you, Chairman Rogers. That's a mouthful, isn't it? Yeah. The subject property consists of 4 different parcels that the applicant's clients are looking to purchase and construct a new Ascend Federal Credit Union on. Just to help orient you a little bit, there is an old furniture store that is right at the corner of East Main Street and Dill Lane. That's one of the structures that would be raised in order to make way for the credit union. There are also 3 existing single-family homes among these 4 parcels and 1 quadruplex. All structures would be raised, and the credit union site would be built in its place. The subject property is zoned commercial local, so the use is permitted by right. The applicant submitted plans to the Planning Commission yesterday for site plan approval, and the plans were approved at yesterday's Planning Commission meeting. However, they were approved subject to a front setback variance being granted along East Main Street. More specifically, the applicant has requested a 27-foot variance from the minimum required 42-foot front building setback. He's actually requested, I believe, a 26.6-foot variance. I generally like to round up. Makes it a little bit simpler and cleaner. So there is a 42-foot front setback along East Main Street. And if we look at the plans submitted by the applicant, and you have these at your tables, you'll see here the credit union building. It has been pushed up to the northeast corner of the property, and it's on the screen in front of you. The building itself will be very similar in nature to the existing Ascend Federal Credit Union that is located on the southeast corner of Franklin Road and Battalion Drive, which is the south extension of Fortress Boulevard, right across from a CVS and an Exxon at that intersection. The applicant, as you can see on the plans in front of you, he has designed it so that, as I mentioned, the building is located at the northeast corner. To the south of the building is an event plaza where there will be occasional bank events occurring there on that plaza. The parking is in the center of the site, and there are the drive-through teller windows at the far west side of the site. There will be access to both East Main Street and Dill Lane. And just on a side note, you can see the solid waste enclosure on the driveway that enters in from Dill Lane. That solid waste enclosure is required to be located outside of the front setback along Dill Lane. The applicant understands this, and he has made provisions to move that solid waste enclosure outside of the front setback. So he is not requesting a variance for that solid waste enclosure. You'll notice on the plans there is some right-of-way dedication that is proposed, and that's one of the justifications that the applicant has provided in his letter to the board. There's a 9-foot right-of-way dedication that is being required along East Main Street, and that's for a future right turn lane from East Main onto South Rutherford Boulevard. The applicant also mentions the fact that the site grading, because of the East Main Street roadbed being higher than the subject property, he is having to place a significant amount of fill on the property and warranting a slope at the rear of the property, and the building is being pushed closer to the front of the site, according to the applicant, to help accommodate the grading plan. You'll notice that Nesbitt Drive is on the east side of the lot. Nesbitt Drive is a private drive. It's not a public right-of-way. And as I understand it, there are 3 parties that have ownership interest in Nesbitt Drive, but the building is not meeting the 42-foot front setback along Nesbitt Drive simply because it is not a front setback requirement is not required along Nesbitt Drive, as it is. As the front setback is not required along that, since it's not a street or a street that is offering primary access to the building. So that is a side setback along what is labeled as Nesbitt Drive. The surrounding land uses, and just to kind of orient you a little bit more, there are single-family residences to the south of the subject property, and minimum landscape buffering requirements will be required. A type B buffer will be required along the western portion of the south property line, and a type A buffer will be required along the eastern portion of the south lot line. The The 15.4-foot distance that the applicant is showing from the front property line along East Main Street is the distance is the distance from the building to the proposed right-of-way line. When the applicant re-subdivides this property to combine the 4 lots into 1 lot of record, he will be required to dedicate that 9 feet at the time of submittal of that plat. So the proposed building is actually 24.4 feet from the existing front property line, and if the applicant was not being required to donate right-of-way, then only a 17.6-foot variance would be required. With that being said, I have some photographs to show you. Well, first of all, here are the building elevations, but I think you'll be able to get a little bit better picture of what the building will look like from the photographs that I have of the existing Ascend Federal Credit Union on Franklin Road. Here is the existing house at 2308 East Main Street. And this is the frontage along East Main Street where the front setback variance is proposed. You can see, as Mr. Taylor mentions in his application, the roadbed of East Main Street does sit up higher than the subject property itself. This is looking south towards Nesbitt Drive, which, as I mentioned, is a private drive. The existing house has driveway access from Nesbitt Drive as well as East Main Street, but the proposed credit union development, as it's shown on the site plan before you, does not have vehicular access to Nesbitt Drive. This is looking west along the East Main Street frontage at the furniture store at the corner of Main and Dill. This is looking south across South Rutherford from the subject property. This is looking across East Main Street from the subject property, looking west down East Main Street, and looking south down Dill Lane. And this is the existing Ascend Federal Credit Union at 4051 Franklin Road. The building will look very similar to this existing credit union building. With that being said, I'll be happy to answer any questions. Mr. Taylor is in the audience today as well, if you have any questions for him.
Thank you, Mr. Blomley. Questions for Mr. Blomley? All right, Mr. Taylor, anything you'd like to add to the application?
Mr. Blomley did a good job describing our hardships. The addition of the right turn lane or future right turn lane, it does increase that request. The primary hardship is because the land is so low. There's some existing drainage problems out there. We are raising the site in the neighborhood of 5 feet to create some on-site storage and to try to force that water back to the street drainage. There's no real structured stormwater system downstream of us. All this water really wants to go toward Dill Lane and the newly constructed Dollar General further down, further close to town. But there's no real structure to get there. So we don't want to harm our neighbors. We want to try to mitigate any impact on them. And so we've tried to build this up. And in order to do that, we push the building closer to the street. And that also takes away the primary activity centers like the front door and the drive-throughs, things like that, away from our neighbors as well.
All right. Any questions for Mr. Taylor? All right, thank you, sir. At this time, we're going to conduct a public hearing. Anyone present wishing to speak for or against the application, if you would, please come to the podium and begin by giving us your name and your address, please.
Hello, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Myra Mason. My interest in this property, I live at 1710 Harold Lane, Murfreesboro, Tennessee. My interest in this property is because we own property around this and joining it that is rental property, and I also own a third undivided interest in the property at 118 Nesbitt Drive. Nesbitt Drive. We own the house at 118 Nesbitt Drive. I would like to present to you at this time, if it would be okay with you, letters that I've written, and this really reflects on the process that has taken place, which we really didn't know anything about till a few days prior to this, no meetings or anything were we granted access to. I had instigated a meeting by myself to see the site plan. No neighborhood meetings were taking place. I did hear of a contract and got very little information on it as far as what was happening or anything. I have submitted 2 letters to the Planning Commission yesterday. One of them is addressed to Mr. Matt Taylor. One of them was addressed to Mr. John Harney, which I provided y'all copies of those letters, where you can see the background of the said issue. And also I have submitted mainly my concerns on the front sheet of paper that is dated November 20th by me, that shows my concerns about this property. The main issue to me is, I'll give you all time to read that.
Okay, go ahead.
Okay, thank you. The main issue that came up to me on the beginning was the survey stop in my property at 119 Deal, which they removed, and I see presently, after I instigated a meeting with Mr. Matt Taylor, that is not involved in this, and I wanted to make sure of that. Another problem is that we were not notified of anything or had any information concerning this due to persons involved in it that were not forthcoming with information about it. Therefore, my concern was concerning the 25-foot privately owned strip which joins this, which is a very, very unusual piece of property in itself. I used to be in real estate, and I've never seen anything like the piece of property this is. It was originally supposed to be designated as a street by Mr. A.C. Nesbitt, who developed some properties in there, but it was never officially designated as a street. Therefore, it is privately owned, the 25-foot strip, by me and my husband. I say him, he's deceased, Mr. Wallace and Mr. Davis. Undivided 3-party interest. This was brought to the attention of the surveyors, I believe, according to the information I can find out, but was never acted upon. So at this late date, we are trying to solve this situation and this problem. It has not been resolved, but they're working toward trying to do something about this to resolve it so that there could be a clear title passed, in my opinion. A clear title needs to be passed. As you will see, the other concerns I have is the setback change, how many other businesses of this type in Murfreesboro have been changed to this minimum setback? And will the shorter setback mean more pavement and aggravate and increase the drainage problems on existing problems that are already there, which I have pictures of when a quadruplex was built on Dell Lane? I had about pictures, and I couldn't find them for today's meeting, that are approximately 4 inches of water in about a 20-foot circular area and will not drain off the area now. The other thing that I was called to your attention is the question of, that is East Main Street, which is a narrow road already, and it comes fast approaching the Rutherford Boulevard red light, which crosses East Main. There are a lot of traffic issues, a lot of wrecks there now, and I would just like to bring that to your attention, traffic concerns. And I would like to ask that one of these letters be put in the permanent file for the Board of Zoning Appeals for today's meeting. And those are what I have, questions and concerns I have relating this. And I appreciate your time and attention to this matter.
All right. Thank you, Ms. Mason.
You did obtain a copy of that, and that will be made part of the permanent record as requested.
All right. Anyone else wishing to speak for or against the application? All right. Then seeing none, we'll declare the public hearing closed and open the floor for further discussion or motion.
Chairman and members of the Board of Commissioners, I can't answer the question about how many buildings have been pushed up closer to the right-of-way as they're proposing here on East Main Street. But from looking at the GIS in this area, what they're proposing is quite consistent with the development known as I can't even say it, at Main Street and Middle Tennessee Boulevard, the restaurant.
East Main Village.
Yeah, East Main Village, which has the Boulevard Bar and Grill. It's consistent with that. It's probably consistent with the way the market across from Rutherford, from East Main Village, is consistent with where the old, I guess that's an old gas station, it's now the grocery store. I think our city core overlay doesn't go this far, but it probably would be consistent with what we're looking at in the much of the older part of town where properties were developed closer to the street, and then we laid the suburban zoning on top of that. So in the older parts of town, until we did the city core overlay here recently, if you wanted to rebuild a house and have it look like it fit the neighborhood, you had to get a variance from the front building setback. So I think this, looks-wise, it would be consistent.
Some of the concerns Mr. Mason had was something having to do with boundary issues, and I know we don't get into any of that, but can you put up maybe the overhead and show me access to the properties? And
Sure.
Is Nesbitt Drive going to be cut off there? Does the Ascend now own that section? Or tell me what's happening with all
Now,
that.
it's my understanding that the only action that will be, or the only construction that will be taking place in Nesbitt Drive, in that private drive, is some grading work, and that's off-site grading work because it's not technically on the 4 subject parcels. Access, as you can tell here, there is one along Dill Lane and one here. And I was looking at that earlier to determine the distances. I think that the access on Dill Lane is about 60 or 70 feet north of the property to the south, and the driveway access along East Main Street is probably about 120 feet away from the Rutherford Boulevard intersection. Mr. Taylor, is that accurate?
I think from the intersection is about 250.
200,
if I'm
okay.
mistaken.
Yeah.
From the center of the intersection to that. And Mr. Blomley's right. We are actively trying to work with Ms. Mason and Mr. Davis, the other 2/3 owner. Ascend has an interest in purchasing that 25-foot strip, known as Nesbitt. But we can revise the plans if we can't work that out with them to still construct the building without that. But we would like to purchase that. So.
And Chairman Rogers, one thing that I would add with regards to yesterday's Planning Commission meeting, when this item was approved conditionally by the Planning Commission yesterday for site plan approval, when I say this item, I don't mean the variance. That's under the purview of the Board of Zoning Appeals. When the site plan was approved yesterday by the Planning Commission, it's my understanding from the staff who supports the Planning Commission that it was approved conditioned upon prior to the permit being issued, that evidence be submitted to the planning staff that the applicant does have permission from the property owners of Nesbitt Drive to grade in Nesbitt Drive, and if he cannot obtain that permission prior to the issuance of the building permit, then that he will redesign his grading plan so that the grading is outside of Nesbitt Drive to avoid any conflict with that strip of land that has the split ownership.
So right now, Nesbitt Drive is not part of the property that's being developed.
That's correct. It borders the property being developed.
Yeah, Chairman, my assistant and I did quite a bit of research on this, trying to find out what had happened. And while I wouldn't give a title opinion on it, but it's fairly clear that Ms. Mason is correct that this was never dedicated as a road. And there are a number of instances in it being referred to as a private drive by and Mr. Nesbitt, who had, I think, 12 acres or something like that in this area. As he began to sell off some properties, he created this driveway that served as a public street for those folks, but it was always called a private drive. When the city built South Rutherford through here, and did the intersection with South Rutherford and Main Street, Nesbitt Drive was cut off so that it no longer, it used to go all the way to Main Street, and it went from Main Street down to his properties. That was cut off in the course of that construction, and of course it wasn't needed by those people anymore because they had other access. The title, I mean, technically I think Ascend has no title interest in that strip. That's Nesbitt Drive, 25 or 30 foot, whatever it is, wide. I suppose perhaps they do have some interest because when they close and buy property from Mr. Wallace, Mr. Wallace is one of the people who I guess at this time has a 1/3 interest, or I think it's third, but whatever the interest is, they'll have his interest, but other people will still have an interest in this, and their actual property line does stop at the west edge of Nesbitt Drive. The legal description of the property they bought stops at the west line of Nesbitt Drive. So it's something that maybe should have been taken care of years ago. It wasn't, and it's the kind of thing that when redevelopment happens, hopefully it'll get taken care of now.
The Stephen Davis property there to the south, so they access that property through Nesbitt Drive?
Yes.
Okay, and then,
Yeah.
and then on the South Rutherford, that's their egress, right?
Yes.
Right. Yeah. Yes, folks. And I suppose while there was someone living, I'm not sure there may still be, but on the Wallace property, they would have gone down Nesbitt Drive to the area there where it crosses over to South Rutherford.
Chairman Rogers.
Roughly a block below the Main Street.
Chairman Rogers, I've got the aerial photo pulled up. If we could get that on the big screen. Nesbitt Drive has a small connection to South Rutherford Boulevard here, and there are the property that's right at the corner that is part of the subject property. It has, as I mentioned, a driveway onto East Main and a driveway onto Nesbitt. And then there's the next property to the south, which has its ingress egress off of Nesbitt, that's one of the subject properties that the house would be torn down. And then there are, I believe, 2 additional houses south of there on Nesbitt, one owned by Davis and one owned by Miss Mason, I believe, that have their access from Nesbitt Drive. I believe there are 2 parcels that will remain with access to Nesbitt.
Okay, got it.
Who owns the property between Nesbitt and North South Rutherford?
That's city right-of-way.
Okay.
Between Nesbitt and South Rutherford, north of that cut-through that is also called Nesbitt, that's part of the city right-of-way.
Right. It's the parcel maps that are on our GIS system. So when we're looking at the parcel maps that are overlaid on the GIS system, Mr. Taylor's firm has done some additional research beyond just the parcel maps on the GIS system, as has Mr. Ives and his assistant. So when referring to the property lines, I would have you reference the site plan instead of the aerial photo.
So the line. The property line is on the west of Nesbitt Drive.
Correct. The property line of the property that Ascend will be buying is the west boundary here of Nesbitt Drive. It's the dashed line, then a couple dashes, and then a longer line and a couple more dashes on the west. If you see the Nesbitt Drive pavement area, it's immediately to the west of that is the property line of the property that they're acquiring. Now, where the line that says right-of-way, which is on the east side of Nesbitt Drive, to maybe how we got here, the Masons owned, if I recall, a 20-acre, somewhere around a 20-acre tract that started at this right-of-way line and went east, and the city acquired that entire tract and built Rutherford through it as it is, and then I believe parts of at least some of it that's to the east of South Rutherford has been sold, I believe. But this pointed triangle, basically between Nesbitt Drive and South Rutherford, the city has held until as right of way. So the city mows that, maintains it. It's a excess piece of right-of-way that there's really been nothing else to do with it, till now, and maybe not.
And the future turning lane is on East Main Street. The
future right turn lane would be to make to put a right turn lane there on Main Street that would cut in
to the north side of that proposed building.
Of the proposed site, right? And they have to dedicate that now. I don't think they have to build that with this project, but they have to dedicate the right of way, and so of course until it's built, they'll probably mow it, I would think, but to keep their site looking nice. But once that's built, then that'll put that road that much closer to their front door.
And not to cut off Ms. King, but so understanding that this is where this right of way is being, and from the Planning Commission yesterday, the purpose of this variance request is with respects to this right turn lane in and of itself. So my question is, without that right turn lane, would we be requesting this variance, or if so, what would be the reduction in feet that we would be asking for?
Mr. Halliburton, I can answer that question for you. If they weren't being required to dedicate right-of-way along East Main Street, the building, instead of being 15.4 feet from the front property line, would be 24.4 feet from the existing front property line. And so if the applicant was not being required to donate right-of-way, then he would still be required a 17.6-foot variance with the building in its proposed location. So it would reduce the amount of setback variance required, but there still would be a setback variance
Right.
required.
And then my other comment would be, based upon that, we're dealing with 2 front setbacks, correct? We're dealing with the front setback with respects to South Rutherford, and we're dealing with the front setback with respects to East Main Street.
Not a front setback along South Rutherford because the property doesn't directly border South Rutherford, but there is a front setback along Dill Lane. Because of that strip of Nesbitt Drive, which is not public right-of-way, that actually separates the subject property from the right-of-way of South Rutherford Boulevard.
Well, what I'm getting at is, and you can still correct me if I'm wrong, they would have a front setback requirement to meet, which they meet, because we've got 2 road frontages here, correct, or no?
The 2 front setback requirements would be from East Main Street and Dill Lane.
Okay.
And they are, one thing that I might add is you can see there is some right-of-way dedication along Dill Lane as well. They are being required to dedicate right-of-way to create a 3-lane cross-section as Dill Lane enters East Main Street. So they'll be dedicating right-of-way along East Main and along Dill as well.
Okay.
The setback along Nesbitt Drive would be a side setback.
I see.
Since it's not a street that offers primary access to the property.
Okay.
But the only variance request is related to that one section in front that fronts Main Street, not
That's correct.
the other areas.
Yeah, the building is quite a distance away from Dill Lane.
So we only have one question, one question
One
presented.
variance request.
That's correct.
And it's the Main Street request.
Yes.
And then, Mr. Taylor, if you don't mind, so in addressing some of the questions that Ms. Mason or concerns that she had, you made the comment that one of the reasons for the buildup of this lot is to help with the water issue. I mean, I know we're not there yet in reference to the site plan, but that's one of the purposes as part of this process, correct?
Yes, sir. We're going to, whenever I looked at the site after we did our survey, it appears to me that the site is a bowl in itself. Water looks like it should be bowling and pooling in the backyards, and so it does not have a discharge to a neighbor until it builds up some distance. And so I look downstream. I don't see any pipes crossing under Dill Lane. I don't see any good roadside ditches anywhere, so I don't see a structured system down there. And so in our work through the site plan at Planning Commission, we met with the city engineer to discuss that fact, and he said, let's look at some infiltration, and then as emergency overflows, we'll put it back in the system on East Main Street, which continues east out into Rutherford Boulevard. And so right now we have designed the site with permeable pavers, and we're going to look to balance that with some bioretention, which is also an infiltration type system, so that water is infiltrating on site and spilling back over to East Main instead of going on to our neighbors to the south or even back to the west.
And then my final question, and I know a lot of attention has been made to this Nesbitt Drive issue, but the way I'm understanding it, and I'm not an attorney, but the way I'm understanding it, to a degree, that is a mute issue with respects to this variance request, because you're either going to work it out that you can purchase it or you're not. But either way, it's not going to have an impact on, and I don't know that this even would come into our play, be a title issue with respects to this property.
Yeah, the variance and the Nesbitt Lane issue are separate issues.
Yeah.
And you're right. If we can't work it out with Ms. Mason and Mr. Davis, then we'll revise our plan so we're not grading there. We'll look at some retaining walls along that. That's not what we want. We want to have a nice, clean look from the back of the sidewalk on Rutherford to our front door. But if we can't come to an agreement, that's what we'll do.
And then the last question. So if you can't come to an agreement, and you do the retention walls that you're talking about, that would have no other impact in reference to any other variances that you would be requesting on this property. Is that a correct statement?
No, sir, it would
Okay.
not.
Where is the fill going to come in?
Like
The dirt,
off
where location on the?
We were talking about that earlier. It would definitely not be off of Nesbitt Lane. And so we're talking about probably putting that off of East Main. We'll work with the city engineer department to confirm they're okay with that. But I think that's the preferred route and entrance location for the neighbors based on what we've heard.
And so the need, because one of your practical difficulties is the need to regrade. And so the need to put that, due to drainage issues, you would need to put that dirt close to Main Street. Is that what?
We will raise the entire site and
Where the building is.
Well, the parking lot too, because what we're going to use is shot rock fill, and that shot rock has some void space in there, so it will act as storage space for our stormwater underneath our paver system, and then it'll also act as storage space underneath our bioretention as well. So we're going to tell the contractor he can't use dirt. He's got to use this rock underneath there.
Okay, so okay.
And we did something similar. We've used this paver system at the Gateway Village, which is along Thompson Lane, which is just north of the Red Robin complex. And then we also used it at the, we called it Polaris, but now it's Trust Point Hospital along West Thompson. In both of those systems, we dictated the type of fill that went in, and that water goes down between the pavers. We've used the bioretention on the First National Bank of McMinnville, which is on Gateway Boulevard behind the hospital, and that's worked very well there. And matter of fact, they just got done redoing it because they're expanding and like that system, so we stuck with the same type system there. So both things that we're talking about, the bioretention and the paver system, we've used around the city in several instances has been a success.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Could I speak again?
We've already closed the public hearing, Ms. Mason. I don't want to cut her off. Is the board inclined to allow Ms. Mason to come up? Ms. Mason, if you want to make another comment, we don't want to cut you off. We want to hear everything you have to say.
Concerning drainage.
Okay.
I don't know, Mr. Matt Taylor, maybe he is aware of this, but up there when they built the new Rutherford Boulevard, Mr. Blomley may have been up there and seen this, that triangle you're talking about. They instigated the drive to our properties when Nesbitt Drive was cut off. Nesbitt Lane was cut off from Rutherford Boulevard. They went down Rutherford Boulevard and they instigated a off-ramp. And between that off-ramp to our properties and the property that y'all acquired for Rutherford Boulevard is that V section of land. You know, it's kind of like a V, and you said the city upkept it, kept it up. Well, the problem there, when I was thinking about drainage when y'all were talking about it, is that it's not really adequate there, and Mr. Taylor and them may need to think about this, and y'all may need to think about it. There's a big, huge pipe about this round, and then it goes down into I call it vents that go into the ground. And I don't know where all that water goes to, but it would be subject to approximately the location and could reflect an impact on the drainage issue problem. And I don't know if Mr. Taylor's aware of that or if he's looked at it. I did want to mention it. It would be addressed in the meeting and would be recorded.
Thank you, ma'am. I think Mr. Taylor was nodding that he has looked at it and has addressed it.
And Chairman Rogers, our engineering department, as they always do, has scrutinized the plan and has, given their feedback to Mr. Taylor. And before any permits are issued, the plan has to be, has to pass muster with our engineering department for drainage requirements. And I want to assure the board that our engineering department has reviewed this plan.
All right. We've had the public hearing. I guess we're ready for any further discussion or motion.
I'll make a motion. I hope that the applicant and the joint property owners can work on the Nesbitt Drive issue, but as confirmed in the comments here, I think that part is a moot issue with respects to this application. I do feel like that the variance request comes within the parameters of what we need to look at as part of this board, and so I would I'd like to make a motion that we approve subject to any staff comments.
I'll second.
All right. Have a motion and a second. Is there any further discussion? Not. All in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed? All right. Mr. Taylor, that application has been approved. All right. Staff reports and other business.
The only thing that I have, Chairman Rogers, is just a reminder, because the holidays, our December meeting is a little bit off our normal schedule. It will be on Thursday, December the 18th at 1 o'clock as usual.
All right. If there's no other business, we're adjourned.